Hello and welcome back to Bounceability, a 5-module resilience journey. And today's webinar is the second one in the series, and it's about how your attitude shapes your resilience. And I do hope that after the first webinar, you took the time to go through those home practices and apply some of those insights and lessons that were shared in the first webinar. I hope it went well, and I hope you learned some things about yourself, hope you lifted your water levels up and took some of those lessons and made some positive change for yourself after that first webinar. But today's webinar is about something a little bit different. It's about your attitude. It's the second thing that resilient people share, and it's a great attitude. And the greatest discovery of any generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitude. And that's a quote by William James. And I'll illustrate this by telling a story of some of a placebo effect research that was done, where they took two groups of patients, and one group was given medication through syringe by a doctor, and the other group was given medication automatically through a pump in IV. So one group was given medication with the doctor, and the other one through IV. And they found that those given medication by a doctor perceived that the medication was better for them and they got better faster. And those that got medication through a syringe, through an IV pump, didn't get better as fast. So it goes to show that your mind and your attitude towards what you're getting is so powerful. It can even help you get better faster purely because you perceive something you're getting is better than, say, you got it in another method. So your attitude towards something is very, very important, and particularly with resilience, which I'm going to demonstrate to you through today's webinar. And an insight I'm going to share with you today is that attitude is really broken down into three things, and I call them the 3 Ps. And the first P is permanence. And permanence is when we look at negative things happening around us and we see them as ongoing. So resilient people know that things will change, whether they are good or bad. And I'm going to illustrate this through a story. And it's a Tao story about a farmer. And this farmer was very poor. He was the poorest man in his village. And the only resource that he had was a horse. And he lived with his son. And the village would always say to him, "We feel so sorry for you. You've only got one horse. You have nothing else. You're so poor." And the man would say to them, "We'll see what tomorrow brings." And one day his horse ran away, and the whole village felt really sorry for him and saying, "Oh no, now you're even in a worse position." And the man said, "We'll see what tomorrow brings." And the next day the horse came back, but he came back with a whole herd of horses. So now the man in this village was the richest man in the village. He had loads and loads of horses, and everyone was very envious, and they said, "Oh my goodness, now you're the richest man in the village. We're so envious of you." And the man said, "We will see what tomorrow brings." And the next day, while his son was helping him care for the horses, he fell off a horse and broke his leg. And now there was nobody to help the man look after the horses, and he had to start selling the horses potentially. And the village was like, "Oh no, what bad luck you have. Now you're going to have potentially not be able to look after all of your wealth." And the farmer said, "We'll see what tomorrow brings." And the next day, the country he was living in went to war, and all of the oldest sons in the village had to go to war, but his son had to stay home because he had a broken leg. And that story is the perfect illustration that things will change, whether it's a good day or a bad day, tomorrow will be different. And resilience means understanding that you are not permanently in a bad place. So resilient people understand that negative things are not ongoing forever. And the next P is pervasiveness. Pervasiveness is how things enter into your life and infiltrate and like this ink in this glass in front of you, how one experience can color your whole experience. And it's pervasiveness is how we allow positive events to brighten our entire experience rather than letting negative events darken the other areas. So resilient people know, don't allow a negative event to darken all of the areas in their life. People who have low resilience will often have something bad happen, and then everything in their life becomes gloom and doom, and they become very sad with everything. Whereas resilient people understand that there are positive things around them, even though there is one negative thing happening, and they don't let that one negative thing ruin everything around them. The last P in the three Ps is personalization. And personalization is around how you, as a resilient person, understand the context of the things happening around you and the negative thing happening to you. And the best way I can explain this is um, I once started a job, and I was headhunted into this job. And on my very first day of work, my boss took me into a meeting with the other senior managers in this organization and announced to them in that meeting that she had never told them this, but she announced to them that from that day forward, they were all going to be reporting to me and not her anymore. And this was a shock to those people in that room. They didn't even know me. And after that, I felt like it was really difficult for me to get to know those people. They were really cold and icy towards me, and I thought they didn't like me. But then I thought about how there was real tension because they weren't expecting to report to me. They didn't know me. They didn't have a relationship with me. And so that was a shock to them. And over time, after they got to know me, that the way they treated me really changed. And a non-resilient person would have taken that situation very personally and every day thought that it was just them, and they would have felt worse and worse and worse. Whereas understanding the context of why those people might be acting in that way and why they might be feeling that way allowed me to stay resilient and stay focused and not hate my job that I'd just started because people weren't nice to me. So I could have left because nobody wanted to work with me or report to me, but what I realized was those people were in a difficult situation and just needed time to adjust to that change and get to know me. And that is a good skill to have in terms of resilience, is understanding personalization. So our beliefs and our attitudes often form the basis for making decisions or being negative. And our belief is contagious. It wins supporters and it can also be self-fulfilling. And as Harvard professor Rosabeth Moss Kanter shows in her book Confidence, the belief you can win creates momentum, which improves your chances of winning. So I will have links to all of these books and TED Talks and so forth that I mentioned, and I'll make sure that you get those as part of this webinar. So that book is also a really good book. Now that we've covered a little bit about attitude and how your attitude is so important for keeping your resilience and keeping you moving forward, I'm going to talk to you about something called the Penn Resilience Program Perspective Check. And they do something that's called a spider diagram. And a simple way to do it is if you hold your hand up and your 5 fingers are 5 things that can potentially happen. So you're facing a difficult situation, and if you put your hand up, those 5 fingers are 5 different things that can happen after this difficult situation. So let's use the example that I used earlier of me starting that job, and um, and those people um, being icy and cold towards me after they found out they reported to me. And I can ask myself, what's the best thing that can happen here? And the best thing that could have happened there was the next day they would have all forgotten about that announcement, and they all would have loved me and been super friendly to me. And then if I go to the bottom finger, I go, what's the worst thing that can happen? And the worst thing that could have happened was they continued to ignore me, they didn't respect me, and I would have gone through 6 months of them never wanting to interact with me, and I would have had to leave my job. And if I go to the top hand finger again, the second finger is, what's the next best thing that can happen? Well, the next best thing that could happen was they might they might be unfriendly for 2 or 3 days, but then they'll warm up to me after a week and things will settle down. And if I go to the second finger from the bottom, what's the next worst thing that can happen? So not the absolute worst, but what's a little bit better than the worst thing. And a little bit better with the worst thing was, maybe for 3 months they would have been icy towards me, but after a while they warmed up. And then if you think about the middle finger, which is what's the most likely thing that will happen? And in that situation, the most likely thing that will happen was me try to build relationships with them and worked hard to get to know them as I do with my personality. And after a few weeks, they would have warmed up to me and I would have understood what that was that they were feeling. And I could continue to manage that team without any problems. So it's a way to look at your situation and all the different possibilities of what could happen next rather than only focusing on the worst. Because non-resilient people will often know what the worst thing that could happen and they will only think about that and they think that's the only thing that will happen. Whereas the reality is there are lots of likelihoods. There are lots of things that could potentially happen, and you don't have to think of the worst thing all the time. So, the diagram is about asking yourself perspective check questions. What's the best that could happen here? What's the worst that could happen here? What's the most likely? And remember that whatever actually does happen, the spider diagram still holds. Those 5 fingers still hold. So let's say the worst thing actually did happen. At the end of that, I can do another spider diagram and I could go, what's the next thing that could potentially happen? And I could follow a better timeline after that. It doesn't have to be the worst thing all the time. And this flows on nicely to a tool I'm going to share with you today, which is called storyboarding. And you can apply storyboarding at work. In the last webinar, I talked a lot about the aged care sector, but remembering that you can apply any of these resilience techniques to any profession. So if you're not in the aged care sector, I was very specific last time, but this could be applied to any sector, any industry you work in. Resilience is the same no matter where you work. And you can also apply storyboarding to personal things that are happening to you. So not necessarily just at work, but also personally. And storyboarding is a great tool to help you move through difficult situations. I'm going to share this technique with you today. And the tool is 6-part storyboarding. So it's about doing this in 6 parts. And the first thing you'll do is draw a box with 6 compartments. And those 6 compartments have very specific areas to think about. And these are the 6 areas. So the first one is, here's me facing this challenge. The second one is, my hopes for what I'd like to happen here are. The third one is, obstacles or difficulties in the way. The fourth one is, what helps me here is, particularly any strategies, strengths, resources, or insights. Number 5 is a turning point or a positive shift might happen if I. And the last box is specific achievable steps. So really it's about, if you think of a storyboard is used in making a movie, for example, and or creating a story for a novel or a book. And they always have a starting point, and there's always an end point, and a storyboard for you is really creating how you'd like to move through this story that you're about to go through, this difficult time. So starting point, facing this problem, this is what I'd hoped to achieve, or the hoped outcome that I'd like out of this, and it's usually a positive one. What will be difficult? What will help me? What are the turning points, and what are the steps that I can take to help me move through this? If we start in the first box, here's me facing this challenge. You can think about the problem that you're facing. And if you remember this graph that I shared in the first webinar, which is your capacity versus the challenge. So if something's very challenging and you've got no capacity, you might be over the edge. So what are those over the edge challenges that you're facing at the moment? That's where you can start. And the storyboard will help you move from that red zone to the orange zone, which is that growth edge, the edge that we want to be in. So if you're struggling to think about what a challenge could be that you are facing to put in a storyboard, it's those over the edge challenges that we talked about in the first webinar. In terms of what your hopes are for what you'd like to happen, remember the spider diagram. We talked about what's the worst thing that could happen, what's the best thing that could happen, what's the most likely thing that could happen. So in here, you would look at that spider diagram and go, okay, the most likely thing that could happen is maybe what I want to happen here, or maybe the second best thing is what I'd like to happen here. You just put that in there. Nobody ever wants the worst thing to happen, so you probably wouldn't put those in here. But the spider diagram will help you determine what you hope will happen in this situation. What will the outcome be? And using that example I used earlier, my hope for when that team was being icy and cold towards me, my hope was that they'd get to know me, and after a couple of weeks they would warm up to me and we'd have a very healthy working relationship. So that's what I would have put in this area here. In the third box, you talk about the obstacles or difficulties in the way. And if you remember from webinar 1, we talked about our boat and traveling on the river, and the things that raise our water levels and things that drop our water levels. So some of the difficulties in the way might be the things that are dropping your water levels. Could be that you're not getting enough time to exercise. It could be that you're not spending enough time with your family. It could be that you're not getting, that you're not having opportunities to do the things that relax you. So, or it could be other difficulties that you're facing. So for me, the difficulties I could put in there would be that I wasn't sure why people were being icy cold towards me. People were facing challenges at work that I didn't yet know about. Um, and I was new in the job, so people didn't know who I was. So there's lots of difficulties or obstacles that you can pop in there to help you move through the storyboard. And this is an opportunity to talk about Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck talks about fixed mindset and growth mindset. She's written some amazing books, which I can share with you after this webinar. And a fixed mindset is when we have a fixed picture of how we are. So this is how I am. I can't see it changing. Um, I'll never, I'll never be able to change myself to be better. I'll never be able to learn this new skill. That's what a fixed mindset is. And a growth mindset allows you to see that each moment in your life is like a frame in a movie, and that you can learn new things and things can change, and that things aren't going to be stuck the way they are all the time. Remember that permanence of the 3 Ps. And this is important to note when you're putting in some of those obstacles or challenges, that you don't put things like, I'm the problem and I will never change, or if you write problems like that, obstacles like that, it's going to be very difficult for you to move through the story and start putting in suggestions for yourself that will bring about good change. And remember that we're more likely to crash our boat into the rocks when the water level is low, and resilience is like that water level. You have to remember what factors push that water level down and drop your resilience levels. So, like I mentioned earlier, for me personally, it's if I don't get time to exercise, if I don't spend time with my family and friends. Those are the things that push that water level down. And that's part of your storyboard, is understanding what pushes that water level down. And also remembering that you can push that water level up by doing things that raise your resilience, that boost your energy, that make you feel positive. We talked about social connection in the first webinar. So spending time with people you truly care about. And those upward arrows have a buffering effect. They help in those moments when things feel really tough. And those are some of the things that you need to think about in terms of a storyboard, is what are some of those upward arrows that will help me. So for me, making sure I spoke to my mentors and people who and my coaches through that job and that challenging situation, they were able to give me a different perspective and made me feel less alone. And those upward arrows are strategies, strengths, resources, and insights. They're the helping processes, the things that we do that help our response to this challenging situation. And that's the fourth part in the six-part storyboard, is what will be helpful here for me. What are the strategies, strengths, resources, and insights that I can use to help my response be more positive and help me move forward? But what does that mean? So strategies are practical things that we can do. So storyboarding is a practical thing that we can do. It's a strategy. We can practice mindfulness. We can go for a walk, use problem-solving tools, or we could write in a journal about how we're feeling. Our strengths are the things that we draw upon from within ourselves. So being future-minded, not having a fixed mindset, by having a growth mindset, by having courage and bravery. Do you have a sense of humor, kindness? Are you patient? Do you have good judgment? Resources are what we turn to for nourishment or inspiration or guidance or support. So for me, those resources I mentioned earlier were my coaches and my mentors and my friends that were able to give me good advice. But they can also be beautiful places in nature, pets, spending time with your pets, going for walks, places we feel safe, people we trust or people we can phone, websites, books, any resources that can give you different perspectives. And then insights are the ideas and perspectives or sayings that we find useful. So I've been giving you insights in these webinars. I always tell you when I'm giving you a website, an insight. So for example, the growth and fixed mindset. I can't, but we can. This is temporary. The 3 Ps are an insight. What's permanent? What's pervasive? What's me taking things personally and growing through um, those situations, and the insights that we learn from ourselves too can be really good insights for ourselves. So you will need to develop your SSRI toolkit: strengths, strategies, resources, and insights. And how you can start doing this is by remembering a time when you faced something difficult and got through in a way that you now feel pleased about. What helped you do that? What strategies did you use? What strengths did you have? What were the resources you turned to? And what insights did you have from that? And what can you take with you through this new storyboard? So the fifth box is, what's a turning point or positive shift that might happen if I were to? And here, this is where you consider possibilities. Where does this sentence take you? What is the turning point? Remember in the first webinar, I talked about thinking about somebody who you thought was resilient and what was their story and what was the turning point in their story where things started to get better. What's the turning point in your story where things will get better? In my example that I gave about my team not responding positive to me, a turning point for me would have been when one person started warming up to me and approaching me in a warm way and started to um, work with me as part of a team. And when that one person started doing that, we may see a shift where 2 or 3 or 4 more people might have been doing that. So that would have been a turning point or a positive shift might happen, where what might have happened at that stage. And then the very last box in the 6-part storyboarding is talking about the specific achievable steps that you can take to move forward with this. So you can see a storyboard allows you to start viewing your situation in a different way. It takes you through some really great steps of thinking about the situation differently and also thinking about your strengths, your resources, the strategies that you can use to help you move forward in a positive way. And that is what resilience is about. It's not about being negative and enduring. So, in the example I gave you, if I was not a resilient person, I could have just endured going to work every day and those people being negative towards me, and I would have just kept my mouth shut and just endured it until I couldn't take it anymore and would have probably left my job. But a resilient person goes, okay, here's the context of this. Here's the things that I am good at. Here's the support and the resources I can use. Here are the steps that I can do over the next few days to help move this forward so that my story has an outcome that is more positive than the worst case scenario. That's essentially what a storyboard does. It's really a helpful tool to help you put some steps in to make you feel more in control. Everyone knows that when challenging situations come your way, you feel out of control. And a storyboard is just a great way to help you feel in control and feel like you're taking charge of the situation, which is uplifting in it. As always, I end every webinar with practice at work for the following week. And I want you to try storyboarding tools. You can do it in two parts. So if you really want to do a quick one, you can do here's me facing this problem and what helps me here is. And you might be just looking at this is my problem and here are the things that lift my resilience water levels up. Or you can do 6-part full storyboard template. I will make sure that you have a template that you can use, or just use the 6 boxes and move through the storyboard in that way, and move through your challenge through that. Try the spider diagram. Review your SSRI, your strengths, your strategies, your resources, your insights. What's your toolkit? What are the things that you can use to help you through challenging situation? And remembering your what raises your water level that we talked about in the first webinar. And I want you now just to end this webinar with a very quick exercise. And it's a technique or a tip that I can use that helps you think about something differently in the moment. And it's called the power pose. The power pose is talked about by Amy Cuddy in a TED talk. I will share that link with you too. And based on observation of animals in the wild, the less afraid people feel, the stronger they are. Okay. And you can change the way you feel about your fear just by the way you stand. And I want you to stand up, and I want you to stand with your legs apart, with your hands on your hips, and I want you to have your chin held high. And think about how does that make you feel? If you're doing that right now, I hope you are. If you're on your own and nobody's watching, stand up with your hands on your hips, your head held high. How does that make you feel? Now I want you to sit down, and I want you to hunch forward and put your chin down and hide yourself behind your shoulders. How does that make you feel? Each of those poses make you feel different. So experiment with your body language at home and use some of that body language in your challenges at work. Instead of when something challenging comes your way, of hunching away or, letting your shoulders drop or feel, that will make you feel insecure, stand up tall, push your chest out, and embrace a new pose that will help you feel stronger in that moment. It actually does work. Watch the power pose by Amy Cuddy. She will explain it a little bit better. And I challenge you to try the power pose at some point during the next couple of weeks after this webinar. So that's me today on this bounceability webinar on how attitude is helpful towards having building your resilience at work and facing challenges no matter where you work or even at home. And I hope you've enjoyed your day with me, your half an hour with me, and I look forward to seeing you at webinar 3. Take care.